Welcome to the Riding in the Weeds podcast, where we tackle life's inevitable challenges, from navigating mountain bike trails to overcoming business hurdles and forging deeper connections with pets and people. It's easy to find yourself tangled in the weeds, but we're here to help with insights and strategies that'll get you out of the weeds. Our goal is to boost your performance in both sports and everyday life by sharing essential skills that we've learnt along the way. Through tales of our entrepreneurship journey, thrilling biking adventures, and fostering meaningful relationships, your hosts, Natasha Lockey and Ginny Branden, will guide you on a journey that's not only enjoyable, but also inspiring. Join us to gain confidence that you need to navigate the trails of life. Hello and welcome to Riding in the Weeds. You are here with us for episode 70. Pretty excited about that number. We are talking about books that we're reading right now. Interesting conversation. Figured we'd bring this conversation online versus having it offline. And yeah, so let's just kick this off. Ginny, what are you reading right now?
I've mentioned it a couple times because it's actually really long, so I'm still digging into it. But I'm reading Mindfulness Redesigned for the 21st Century.
It's a really big book.
Problem with ordering books on Amazon or from your library is you don't know what they look like. You see a beautiful cover, but there's no perspective on the size of the book. And I've had this happen a couple times now where I've gotten the book and I went, oh, that's a lot.
It's funny though, because it can be the opposite, right? Because on Audible, you look at it and you're like, oh, wow, that's 20 hours of listening. Or you're like, oh, wow, I just spent a credit on 2 hours of listening. So It can go both ways.
Yeah, right.
And I guess it's our perspective of how that's going to come through. And as you just said, there is a lot of like white space and the words are, as my husband likes to look at something like that, he'd be like, well, at least I could read the words. They're not too small. So there's probably a smaller version of the book, but it's like twice the thickness and the like words are tiny. Can I tell you a really funny story? It's about books. My husband, when he was in the hospital, so he broke his back. He had a severe head injury and he couldn't remember much of anything. He was a bit of a goldfish for a little while. And our very close girlfriend of ours gives me a book to give to him. And it was called The Infinite Jest. And this book was probably like 4 inches thick. It was massive. It had the tiniest writing that you could ever find. And he starts to read it and it's like he can't even. And I took it on myself at some point. I'm like, I am going to try and read this book. And it was honestly the smallest writing you've ever seen, the least amount of white space that you've ever seen. Also, the biggest book you've ever, like I carried it around. It was like a weight. I could have done exercise with it. The book had footnotes. It was a fictional book and it had footnotes. And so you're trying to read this book and you don't understand and you're trying to get through it. So you're not reading the footnotes, but then you're like literally had no idea what was going on. And Ian and I always laugh about this like book and we're like, The Infinite Jest. Was that like a joke that she was giving a head injury patient a book that was like phenomenally impossible to read? So anyway, total sense.
I do have to say a lot of the books that I've read lately have a lot of footnotes. Like even this one has quite a few footnotes. And you're looking at this massive tome. And I found out that the last 100 pages is footnotes. So I'm like, oh, cool. That takes a little bit off my plate then. I don't have to worry about reading all that because I'm not reading footnotes. So I am loving this book, despite the fact that it is much larger than I expected it to be, because he's really turning some ideas about meditation upside down. And I've struggled with meditation. We've talked about that before. It's not easy. In the book, he actually has an interview with, I believe, the Dalai Lama. And he asked the Dalai Lama about meditation. And the Dalai Lama admits meditation is really hard. Like, okay, like one of the world's most guru people on this is admitting that this thing that we all say is good for us is hard. And so what I'm loving about the book, though, is that he's really pulling together the idea that when your brain visualizes something versus actually doing an activity. So we've talked about this before. A lot of performers, sports, whatever, elite people will use visualization activities, right? Because there's science that shows that it's useful, that it activates the same areas of the brain, whether you're physically doing the task or just imagining doing the task. Well, this guy looked at that and went, why doesn't that apply to meditation? And the reality is it actually does. So whether you're sitting on a cushion with your eyes closed in silence, or whether you have your eyes open and are doing something, you can achieve the same brain state.
Well, that makes sense, because I'm just thinking like yoga. Yoga, I've recently found out, is only 26 poses. And the forms themselves are 10% of yoga. The other 90% is actually the mind space that you're in. My yoga friend, who is helping me with this camp that we're doing in Baja in January, said to me, Tash, you're already 90% doing yoga, because everything you talk about when it comes to biking is being in the yogic mind. We were having a conversation off screen about my thoughts around our physical activities and how they come into our present state. And I was just talking to Jenny about a conversation I'd had with someone. And it's really interesting, because I think this is actually making it really clear to me. It's about being present. Like when you are riding your bicycle, it isn't about anything else other than being present with the experience that you're having. You don't necessarily need to accept anything. You don't necessarily need to move through anything. You don't actually need to do anything except for be in the moment. And when you're in the moment, it doesn't matter how fast you're going. It doesn't matter whether you made it up and over that rock. None of that stuff matters. And the book I've been reading is The Surrender Experiment, and surrendering to the experience you're having and letting it be, and knowing that this moment and this space and where you are right now is the only moment, and whether you were in it or not, it would still be happening. And so being present, that makes perfect sense. The reason cold dipping is a big benefit to people is because when you're in a cold pool of water, there is literally only one thing you can think about.
How freaking cold it is.
I can do hard things. I can do hard things. Like your brain is right there, and that is the only place it is, because it's flipping cold. And that's, I think, the same thing that the people that really love climbing a steep hill on their bicycle, they love it. And the people that love going down crazy downhill trails on their mountain bike, they love it because it brings them 100% into that present moment. You cannot be thinking about anything else.
Yeah.
But I also sense that this, what you're talking about, is actually about being able to do that without putting yourself into a situation where there's no other option but to think about it.
Yeah. Well, and one of the big points he makes in the book is that many of our meditation philosophies are 2,000-3,000 years old, right? And life back then was very different. And his point about the brain being activated, whether we are internally focused or externally focused, is that 3,000 years ago, it was actually important for us to be internally focused because our world was external. We had to be externally focused. We had to worry about where our next meal was coming from, how we were going to stay safe, how we were going to have shelter over our heads, how we were going to be warm at night. All of those basic survival things were very important. So we had to stay externally focused on a near constant basis. Therefore, meditation was very important because it gave us the balance of some internal focus. However, the difference is here we are several thousand years later in a modern world with crazy technology where desk jobs are more common than physical labor jobs. And where is our world focused now? Internally. We have a glut of internal information going on all the time. We have inputs coming into us that get processed internally, emotional stuff that happens constantly internally. Our internal landscape is far more varied and active than our external landscape for so many of us. So, therefore, sitting down to meditate and going internal doesn't have the same benefit that it did several thousand years ago when you never went internal because it was a safety issue at that point. So, being able to find ways to take that meditative state external are really valuable to us now. I know that my barn chores in the morning are often a very meditative state for me. It's that act of the ritual of taking care of that space and taking care of the horses that gets me out of the spinning thoughts in my head and the inner landscape, which is so crazy detailed, and present in my body and with what I'm doing. And those activities have a really big benefit. And that's why I think things like the biking and the riding and a lot of the other sports that people are taking up now that are becoming really, really popular, even so much as to include yoga, is because it helps take the pressure off of the internal focus and give it an external outlet that still allows our mind to be in that present awareness and a bit of a flow state. The book has really been turning upside down my ideas about why it's important to meditate and how that actually looks. And one of his big sort of sticking points is that in our modern, particularly Western interpretation of meditation, how often do you see people's practice? Oh, I sit and meditate every day for 30 minutes, but they get up off the mat and it doesn't transfer. It doesn't carry over into the rest of their day. And you're right, there's 8 pillars of yoga, only 3 of which, if I remember correctly, actually include movement. Shavasana is supposed to be the same length as the asanas, the poses. So if you are in an asana practice for an hour, you should be doing shavasana for an hour. All of those things balance out. But again, yoga was developed several thousand years ago when you were worried about whether or not you had a roof over your head at night and you were going to be warm and fed. So it's a very different perspective from our world where arguably we are far safer on the whole than they were 3,000 years ago. We have antibiotics now. We have medicine now. We have all these things now that they didn't have years ago that we don't have to worry about. But yet our inner landscape is just going bananas all the time, spinning and spinning. And we don't have that physical side of things to help balance it out. And I'm about halfway through the book at this point, and I'm finding I'm digesting it very slowly. I think I'm going to have to start over when I finish again. Because I think I need more time processing all of this information and how do I integrate that and apply it in my life. But yeah, I sit down and meditate every morning and I enjoy that time and I value that time. I have a little bit of a prayer that I use that I've come up with for myself. And then depending on the day, there's lots of different things that I do, some of which are just breathing and trying to focus on that, and some of which are gratitude practices and all sorts of other things. But what if I could take that state and apply it to the rest of my day and my life? How different would things be at that point?
So what is his prescription? Because obviously there's a very big difference between doing external things to avoid and doing external things mindfully.
Yes.
So how is doing the dishes in a meditative state different to doing the dishes to avoid doing something else that you need to be doing, or going for a bike ride to get away from the pressures and the anger and the frustrations, or whatever it is you are trying to escape from. Arguably, my whole gig is you take them with you and then you get frustrated and have issues on the trail, or running away from things because you're constantly physically doing things in order to avoid, which is clearly not what he's saying we should be doing. So how do we do that external activity mindfully and in a meditative state? Have you gotten that far in the book?
No, I don't think so. But there are a couple things that he's already talked about. And one of them is being able to look at things with wonder and to be able to look at the everyday things that we experience with fresh eyes and with a fresh perspective. So our brains create neural pathways. And when we think we know things, it's like putting the groove in the record, right? The brain writes a neural pathway that says, this is how I do this activity, or this is what this looks like, or this is what this means. And then our brain goes, well, I don't have to worry about learning that anymore. So that neural pathway is set. Unless we start asking more questions, or unless we are confronted with something that dramatically goes against our neural pathway that we have already established. So one of the things he's talking about at the point where I am in the book now is just how can you look at things fresh? And I think you actually talked a little bit about this in the last episode when we were talking about play and like looking for hearts, looking for something in your daily environment that's different is a great way to be able to bring you into the present and observe what actually is instead of what your brain is telling you. This is one of the reasons that photographs and what we see look different, because the camera is only ever seeing what is actually in a picture that it took of a scene. Our brains, however, love to fill in information and fill in a lot of gaps. And we have no idea it's even happening. It happens so fast all the time. And so we often end up assuming something about a situation that may or may not be fully accurate without realizing that our brain just filled in a few details. So could you approach even something like doing the dishes? Could you notice the texture of the silverware that you're holding, if there's patterns on it, or the way the soap feels on the silverware versus the plate versus a cup versus plastic versus glass? Could you focus on something like that and explore what's there rather than just mindlessly doing the dishes? How can you bring those little details in? Could you look for blue cars today? How many blue cars can you see? Or could you look for a certain type of tree? How many maple trees can you see in a day? Or find a detail that you can just look for all day and see if you can notice. Or how many different shades of blue cars are there? What detail can you find that can help bring you into the present with awareness and not getting so caught up in the spinning in the head? I mean, how many times have I driven somewhere and gotten there and realized I didn't remember the drive?
Yeah.
That's scary. That's actually legitimately scary.
Yeah, because we check out so often. And just being able to sit in the seat that you're in right now and notice your feet on the floor, notice what temperature the air is around you, notice where you end and where the air begins. My masseuse used to take me into a meditation and really get me into my body, because we spend so much of our time sitting above our body, and the body's doing one thing and our mind is outside of it, and really practicing bringing our mind and our body into the same space is a great practice to do, and just to really be right here, right now, and notice when you start going off into all of the other places that we go to, which is generally the point at which you pick up your phone and you start scrolling on Instagram or Facebook. I noticed last night I came home, my puppy had a play date, so I went and had tea with the grandmother of the puppy, grandpuppy, mum, I don't know what you call them. Her and I were chatting, and then I got home and I felt so lost because I didn't know what to do with myself. I didn't want to sit down in front of the TV. I didn't really know, like I didn't want to do anything. I'd been eating popcorn and I'd had a snack, so I wasn't like overly hungry, so reaching for food didn't make sense. And I was like, I don't know what to do, and I don't know what I want to do. Do I want to pick up a book and read a book? What do I want to do right now? And it was really interesting to just notice that suddenly the world had gone quiet and I had 100 things I could do. And to avoid the 100 things that I could do, TV and scrolling my phone, or I guess picking up a book, were my 3 options.
Yeah.
Fascinating. And I really noticed it was because I didn't want to be silent. I didn't want to be quiet.
Yeah. But what if that sort of restless in-between state is also okay?
Mm-hmm.
What if there's nothing wrong with that? Can you even just sit in it and not feel the need to pick up a book or turn on the TV or pick up your phone? What if you just sit there? You're not going to die from that. You're just not. It's okay. Can we just be in that place and be okay in that sort of in between? To me, my nervous system feels like it's like buzzing or something. Like I get a restless feeling sometimes like that. And the thing is, I know picking up my phone or turning the TV on, and sometimes even a book, I know that's not actually going to, quote, fix the, quote, problem. So I often find I have to wait out those feelings and just let whatever it is go through.
Mm-hmm. Like there has been so much stimulation. We're all under so much stimulation. So when we stop, it's a little bit jarring to the system.
Yeah.
And if we can learn to be with that, there's actually a lot that we can achieve, move through.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you're not going to feel that way forever either. It's going to go away eventually, just because everything changes. So you're not going to get stuck in that feeling. It's not permanent.
It's true. It's interesting, though, how it does feel that way in the moment. Yeah. All right. Well, what else? Any other thoughts from the book? Have we gone through?
I don't know. I am still digging through it and very much looking forward to getting into some more information, because a lot of what he's talked about already has just been so refreshing and a bit of a relief. I'm not alone at sucking at meditation. I'm not alone at feeling like I'm failing at meditation. And that was one of his big points in the beginning of the book. It's like everyone feels like they fail. And there have been a lot of research studies and even anecdotal reports from people where they'll start a meditation practice and then you ask them 6 months later how it's going, and it's not. I think it's important to normalize that and to recognize that that is the experience of most people out there. So if that's the experience of most people out there, then why are we still trying to do it that way? And is there a different way to approach it that will give us the benefits that we're hoping to find?
Well, I think that is because as a society, that's generally how we approach everything. It's in every part of our world right now, the onus is on you. This is how it should be done. This is how you should be. This is how XYZ. And if you're not doing it that way, if you have a problem not doom scrolling on Facebook, if you have an attention problem because your phone's constantly distracting you, if you're overeating, that's a discipline problem. If you're not doing XYZ, it's a you problem and you need to fix you. When so often it is actually an issue that everybody is struggling with, because that is how our world has been set up as a complete distraction, because as long as we are distracted, there's a lot of things that can go on that we won't notice.
And I think it's not even as intentional as that, so much as it's what makes money.
Yeah.
And in our very capitalistic world, Meta makes money when we scroll. News stations make money when we stay on the station. Well, how do we stay on the station? When the news is sensational.
Mm-hmm.
And the challenges in our world is that sensationalism just has to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger, because our nervous systems just keep getting more and more used to the input. I don't even know that that's true, but we just keep getting numb to the volume of input. And so it just has to keep getting louder and louder, but that's how they keep us hooked. So unfortunately, yeah, it is a you problem in that you are the only one that can choose not to get sucked into that. But it's not a you problem in that it is what our world is doing to us now. And that the flow of all of that information, it's made to be addictive. It's made to keep us sucked in, and it's made to make us part with our money. It takes such a large conscious effort to decide that you don't want to live that way anymore. And there are other ways of living, but we have to retrain our brains. Again, those record grooves are scratched in that surface. And once you have a neural pathway that says this is how we do something, changing that neural pathway, you don't just rewrite it. You have to make a new one.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're going to choose not to doom scroll and you're going to choose not to pick up your phone, you have to find a new neural pathway to fill in that gap and rewrite it, and then keep insisting that your brain choose that one and not the other one. And you'll have to argue with your brain for a very long time about that until the new one becomes strong enough that the old one is allowed to atrophy. But you don't just get to rewrite the neural pathway. That's not how the brain works. The brain is incredibly plastic, though, and can change. That's the cool part about it. But sometimes it takes an awful lot of work and focus to be able to do that. And I think that right now, there is not a skill, in my opinion, that is more important than focus and being intentional. If you can cultivate those two skills, you will be able to accomplish so much more than the rest of the world who's just functioning on autopilot now.
Yes. And it's fascinating. A really good example of what you're saying and how hard it is to rewrite those pathways is I've lived in North America for 20 years. I've been driving in North America for 20 years. And I still, when I'm on my bicycle or I'm in a situation where it is not clear to me which side of the road I should be on, because I'm like teaching kids these school programs and we have this fake road set up. And I'm like, hold on a second, which side do I put the stop sign on? Or which side of the road do I pedal my bicycle on this kind of fake asphalt? And it's been 20 years and I know which side of the road I drive on. But it's still there. And if I was to go home and drive for a month in New Zealand on the other side of the road, it would not take me very long to slip back into driving on that side of the road. But then when I came back here, it would take me an intentional effort to go back to this record track. And arguably, I've been driving for longer in North America now than I did in New Zealand, which blows my mind. It was 10 years of driving in New Zealand and it's been 20 years of driving in North America.
But that was child learning.
Yeah.
That was the child level. Not that you were a child when you learned to drive, but that was a young first impression learning. And you grew up watching people drive on that side of the road. So it was very normal to your brain that when you learn to drive, that's how you learn to drive. And so even though you've been driving here longer, that track in the record is worn in there very, very deeply. That's what I wonder about the younger generations that now have technology. I'm going to date myself now. That we've been adapting to all this technology over our lives. So I know what it's like to not have a phone. I know what it's like to not have an internet. I know what it's like to not have a Google. I know what it's like to not have answers immediately for things. It's weird when something happens and I can't get answers now, I'll admit. Just like driving on the other side of the road would feel weird to you at first. But very quickly, I would probably be fine in that situation because I'd go back to what my body knew as a child.
Yeah.
So what's happening to generations now that don't have that sort of empty space and that ability to focus without those distractions being constantly present?
Yeah.
We don't know. We've never been here before.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I guess we can have a lot of gratefulness for it. It's funny because I look at my husband who's 5 years older than me, and he has a way better ability to put down the phone and leave it alone than I do. And it's just that 5-year difference, right? To bring this round, what really came up for me as well while you were talking was the learning of our puppies, right? And that when you can teach them the skills and train them in the appropriate ways when they're young, then it's easier to do that. It can still be done at any age, but it's a lot easier to get that training done at a formative age. And then the same thing with biking. One of the things I really teach people is, when you're relaxed and you're just cruising along, it's not that important to have your feet balanced and level. However, everything you do when you're not thinking, everything you do automatically, everything you do in that space, that is actually what you're training your brain to do. So if you're intentional in that space where you don't need to be, then when your brain stops thinking and freezes because of fear, it's going to do the thing that you do when you're not thinking. So if you're rolling around with one foot up and one foot down because you're being lazy and you're not needing to have that balanced feet, as soon as you get into a situation where your brain stops thinking, the first thing it's going to do is revert to that one foot up and one foot down. But if you can consciously stay in that balanced feet stage, then that is what you will do. Strong core, level pedals, look ahead. I've got this. If you train yourself, that is the state that you ride your bike in, then when you need to and you're frozen, that's what's going to happen. And it is, right? It's that laying down those habits in the empty space. If you train yourself to not pick up that phone when you've got nothing else to do, when you're sitting on the ferry, you're sitting on the bus, you're waiting in line at the checkout of whatever you're doing, to stand there without your phone, checking Facebook or checking your messages or quickly scrolling Instagram, every moment that you can do that in empty space and instead be present to the sounds of the coffee shop, the smell of the coffee shop, the noise of the people around you. And I think that's a lot of what you're saying, is bringing yourself into a space of what are you doing in the empty space? And that was what I was so aware of yesterday when I came home. I'm like, first instinct, go and get something to eat. But I'm not hungry. Second instinct, turn on the TV. But there's nothing on the TV. So why would I turn that on? Third instinct, scroll my phone. I don't want to scroll my phone. There's nothing in my phone. Fourth instinct, be frustrated because the fantasy book I was reading has ended and I have to buy a credit in order to get the next one, which I did go and do. But just noticing myself go through all of those things and be like, okay, so what? I'm just going to go and stare at the fire.
It's a perfectly legitimate thing to do, frankly.
But that's boring. Being able to be in that space of just sitting and being and allowing and just taking a moment and getting the noise out of the head.
I think what that brings up for me is that how we do the smallest of tasks is how we do everything. I have long since approached working with the horses that way, that every moment I am there with them is training. It is doing something with them. And sometimes sitting and doing nothing with them is as valuable as actually doing something. Mm-hmm. So what am I doing, and what is the quality of what I'm doing while I'm with them? And if we can approach not just training our pets and our animals that way, but we can approach life that way. What is the quality of what I am doing now in this moment? The quality of washing dishes, or the quality of the work I'm doing for my job or in my business. What is the quality that I am approaching it with? That I think it will simplify our world a little bit, and it'll take a little bit of the pressure off, because you're not so caught up in the spinning in your head as much as you are as just focusing on what you're doing and the quality with which you're doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because when Ian and I are traveling, I think maybe this is one of the things I love about being on the road is we won't have any music playing, and we won't be talking about anything, because going into a deep conversation while someone's trying to drive along the road with a 28-foot camper behind them is, that's not a space that Ian can hold. And having a light conversation about nothing, we've been together for way too long. There's literally nothing to be said in a really good way. We haven't got music playing because either we're in somewhere there's no way of playing our music. It's now not as easy. There's no radio. So we're just sitting there, and we will sit there silently for hours just driving along. And I'm just looking out the window, watching the world go by, and being very aware and very present with the times that it's appropriate for me to start a conversation and the times when it's not appropriate to have that conversation. And just being present has been actually really pretty cool. And when we came back a couple of years ago and had no data, I couldn't pick up my phone because there was no point. There was nothing in it. There was nothing to do in my phone. Or being without service for hours at a time. You notice just sitting and being is all there is to do. And it's pretty awesome.
Yeah. I love it.
Well, that was cool. I hope that you guys enjoyed that conversation around the latest book that Ginny's reading. To be honest, I'm just stuck in a fantasy novel that I knew I shouldn't start. And now my habits are falling apart right now. All my good habits are sliding backwards into bad habits. So I'm going to have to bring some conscious awareness into building space around that. But once
and that's why I don't read fiction.
It's really good sometimes. And I have been really appreciating having a fiction book next to my bed at night because I'll read a few pages. But it is somewhere where I lack self-control. Whereas with something that's deeper, I generally have more self-control. That's a conversation for another day.
Right.
We are such interesting creatures. I am Natasha Lockey, and I am a life and performance mountain bike coach, all about helping you get present with what's going on in your reality, take steps towards creating the vision that you want to create and be your reality. You can find me at Betty Go Hard on Instagram. You can find me on Facebook, Natasha Lockey, LinkedIn, Natasha Lockey. And yeah, please, comments, reviews. We would love to hear from you. And if you've got ideas for topics you'd love us to kick around, let us know. And yeah, still got spaces in my January retreat in Baja. So if you have questions about that, please reach out to me. I would love to tell you more. What about you, Ginny?
Yeah, I'm Ginny Branden. I'm an animal communicator and energy healer for animals and their people too. If you are looking to deepen your relationship with your pet or working through behavior challenges or life challenges with them, then please reach out to me so we can set up a session for you and your beloved animal. And you can find me at soulpetconnections.com or on Substack, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube under the same handle. We are so glad to have you join us along for the ride on the show today. You can find the show at ridingintheweeds.com and on all major podcast platforms. And as Tosh said, we would love to have your comments and likes and shares if you know someone who would enjoy this information as well. So Thank you again for being here, and we look forward to hanging out next time.
Have a great day.